Montana, 1920. The old Blackwood cabin stood against the mountain sky like a monument to survival itself. Eleanor Blackwood Cartwright sat on the weathered porch her 46 years, showing in the lines around her eyes but not in the strength of her hands. Those hands had delivered 63 babies across Montana territory. Those hands knew the weight of hard choices. Her grandson Wesley stood at the porch rail, all 6'5" of him, shoulders hunched, like a man trying to make himself smaller. 16 years old and already carrying the burden every Blackwood knew, the burden of being different. "You want to quit school?" Eleanor's voice carried the mountain in it, steady, immovable. Wesley wouldn't meet her eyes. "The other boys, they call me Beanpole, String Bean, say I'm built wrong." Eleanor reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a photograph, edges worn from handling. The image showed a woman standing before this very cabin, tall and broad-shouldered, surrounded by children of all sizes. The woman's face held something beyond contentment. It held victory. "That's your grandmother Judith," Eleanor said, "the woman they called broken, the woman who saved this entire family." She tapped the photograph. "Sit down, Wesley. Let me tell you about the day she arrived in Montana territory, believing she would watch a man die. Let me tell you about the 6 months that changed everything." Wesley sat. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the memory wash over her. Not her own memory, the story her mother had told her over and over until it became more real than any history book. The story of how a woman rejected by the world found the one place where being too much was exactly enough. "It began," Eleanor said, "in Philadelphia, in a convent where your grandmother didn't belong. And it ended here with blood and birth and a legacy that carries your name." Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, September 1873. Sister Judith Whitmore knelt in the convent chapel, but the prayers wouldn't come. 3 years she'd worn the habit. 3 years of trying to shrink herself into a space meant for smaller souls. The other nuns moved around her like water around a stone, always careful, always uncomfortable. At 6 feet and 2 inches tall, with shoulders broader than most men, and hands that could crack walnuts, Judith had learned early that the world had no place for women like her. The chapel door opened. Mother Superior's footsteps echoed against stone, each click of her heels a judgment. "Sister Judith, my office, now." The office smelled of ink and disappointment. Mother Superior sat behind her desk like a magistrate preparing to deliver sentence, her small, delicate hands folded on the polished wood. Everything about her spoke of what women should be: contained, manageable, right. "Father Donnelly in Montana territory has sent an urgent request." Mother Superior's voice carried that particular tone reserved for difficult conversations. "A mountain man requires spiritual care in his final days. Someone capable of handling the rigors of frontier travel. Someone with the physical stamina for such harsh conditions." Judith heard the words beneath the words. "Someone we need to send away. You are uniquely suited for this assignment, Sister Judith. Your particular attributes, which have proven challenging in our communal life here, would serve such a mission well." 3 years and they still couldn't say it plainly. "You're too big. You make the others uncomfortable. You don't fit." "When do I leave, Reverend Mother?" "Tomorrow. The train departs at dawn." Mother Superior slid an envelope across the desk. "Your traveling papers. Father Donnelly will meet you in Helena." A pause. "This is a blessing, Sister Judith. A chance to serve where you can truly make a difference." A blessing. The word tasted like ashes. That evening, Judith packed her meager belongings in the small cell that had been her home. A Bible worn soft from reading, a rosary with beads smoothed by anxious fingers, one photograph of her family taken before everything fell apart, before Robert Ashford. The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. Her wedding day 5 years ago now. The church in Philadelphia filled with society's finest, Judith in her white gown, custom-made because no standard size would fit her frame. Robert standing at the altar, handsome and tall and confident, right up until the moment he looked at her walking down the aisle. She'd seen it in his eyes, the recoil, the horror. He'd waited until she reached him, until her father released her hand, until the witnesses could hear. Then Robert Ashford had leaned close, his whisper carrying to the first 3 pews. "I cannot marry a woman who makes me feel like less of a man. Look at you. You're unnatural." The congregation had gasped. Her mother had wept. Judith had stood frozen in her wedding gown, while Robert walked out of the church, out of her life, leaving behind only the echo of that word. Unnatural. The medical examination had come 2 weeks later. Her mother, desperate to understand, had insisted. 3 doctors had examined Judith like she was a specimen, prodding and measuring and conferring in low voices. Miss Whitmore, your pelvis is malformed. Your womb is tilted at an abnormal angle. Even if you were to conceive, which is highly unlikely given your unusual physiology, carrying a child to term would endanger both your life and the infant's. The head physician had removed his spectacles, his face showing practiced sympathy. I'm afraid your daughter's unusual case comes with corresponding internal defects. Marriage and motherhood are simply not in her future. She should prepare herself for a different kind of life. A different kind of life. The convent had seemed like the only option. If she couldn't be a wife or mother, at least she could serve God. At least she could have purpose beyond being the woman too wrong for the world to accommodate. But even here in this place meant for outcasts and seekers, she remained too much. Too tall, too strong, too physical for the quiet contemplative life. The other nuns stepped carefully around her as if size might be contagious, as if difference were a disease. Sister Agnes found her just before dawn. The old nun's face creased with genuine affection, rare in this place. You're leaving then? Montana territory. A mountain man needs spiritual care. Agnes touched Judith's arm. Her hand looked impossibly small against Judith's solid forearm. Child, listen to me carefully. You are not being sent away because you're inadequate. Then why? Because Philadelphia is too small for a woman like you. Agnes pressed a leather-bound journal into Judith's hands. Write your truth in this. Not what others have told you to believe. Your own truth. Promise me. Judith promised, though she couldn't imagine what truth she might have worth recording. The train journey west took 5 days. Philadelphia to Chicago, Chicago to Omaha, Omaha to Helena, Montana territory. With each mile, civilization fell away like scales from a snake. The neat, ordered farms of Pennsylvania gave way to endless prairie. The prairie surrendered to mountains that touched the sky. Judith watched families through the train windows. Mothers with babies, fathers teaching sons, young couples with their whole lives ahead of them, innocent in their certainty that the world would accommodate their love. Every scene reminded her of what she would never have, what her body, her wrongness made impossible. At night, unable to sleep in the cramped berth, she opened Agnes's journal. The first page stared back blank and expectant. She thought about writing, I am traveling toward death, his death, the mountain man's. Perhaps in witnessing his end, I will find meaning for my own broken beginning. But the words seemed too dramatic, too self-pitying. Instead, she wrote only September 1873, bound for Montana. Sister Judith Whitmore, age 28. She did not write what she was thinking. That 28 years of being wrong had taught her to expect nothing. That hope was a luxury for women built the right way. Helena, Montana territory greeted her with mud streets and rough wooden buildings. The frontier town sprawled against the mountains like it couldn't decide if it wanted to be civilization or wilderness. Men outnumbered women 10 to 1. Everyone moved with purpose, with the kind of determination that came from carving life from unforgiving land. Father Declan Donnelly waited at the train platform, an Irish priest weathered by sun and wind with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He wore his collar, but his clothes were frontier practical, not Philadelphia formal. Sister Judith, his accent carried the old country softened by years in America. Welcome to Montana. Your journey was, well, long, Father. Aye, it's a far piece from civilization. He took her single bag, a gesture of courtesy that seemed automatic despite her size. We've a 2-day ride ahead of us. Best we get provisions and start while the weather holds. They walked through Helena's rough streets. Judith drew stares. She always drew stares. But here the looks held curiosity rather than judgment. Here size might be asset rather than defect. At the mercantile, Father Donnelly purchased supplies. Jerky, hardtack, coffee, dried beans. Practical food for hard travel. The shopkeeper, a thick-armed man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, barely glanced at Judith. You'll need warmer clothes, sister, Donnelly said quietly. The mountains are cold even in September. And the habit, respectfully, it's not suited for horseback riding in rough country. The shopkeeper produced wool trousers, a heavy shirt, a leather coat. Men's clothing, all of it, but the sizes would fit Judith's frame. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I couldn't possibly wear men's garments, Father. You can and you will if you want to survive the journey. Donnelly's voice held gentle firmness. This isn't Philadelphia, sister. Out here, pride gets you killed. Practicality keeps you breathing. They rode out at first light. Father Donnelly led the way on a sturdy bay gelding. Judith followed on a massive roan mare, the only horse in the livery strong enough to carry her without strain. The trail climbed steadily into the Rocky Mountains, leaving Helena behind like a half-remembered dream. For hours they rode in silence. The only sounds were hoofbeats creaking leather and wind through pine trees. The mountains rose around them, stone giants that made Philadelphia's buildings look like children's toys. The air tasted different here. Sharp, clean, empty of the coal smoke and human press of the city. By noon of the first day, Judith's legs ached from the unfamiliar exercise. Her hands, unused to holding reins for hours, had begun to blister. But she said nothing, complained about nothing. She'd learned early that admitting weakness only confirmed what everyone already believed, that she was wrong, inadequate, broken in ways that mattered. They made camp beside a creek as the sun touched the western peaks. Father Donnelly built a fire with practiced efficiency. He set coffee to boil and fried salt pork in a blackened pan. The domestic competence of it surprised Judith. Priests in Philadelphia barely knew how to light their own lamps. Sister Judith, Donnelly said when they'd eaten, I need to speak plainly with you. I've brought you here under false pretenses. Judith's stomach clenched. What do you mean, the mountain man you've come to attend? Nathaniel Blackwood. He's not dying, at least not of any illness. The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Then why am I here, Father? Donnelly poured more coffee, his movements deliberate. Nathaniel Blackwood is 42 years old. He's been a mountain man for 15 years, trapping and hunting these ranges. 3 years ago, his wife Elizabeth died in childbirth. The baby died with her. Nathaniel buried them both with his own hands in February snow. Judith waited. There had to be more. Nathaniel holds a land claim of 5,000 acres, prime territory rich in game and timber. Under the Homestead Act of 1862, he proved up that land, built a cabin, worked the soil, lived there 5 continuous years. The land is his by law. I don't understand what this has to do with me, Father. Montana Territory has an additional requirement for land claims. Family establishment. It's meant to prevent speculation to ensure the land is truly being settled, not just held. Donnelly met her eyes across the fire. If a homesteader loses his spouse, he has 3 years to establish a new family. Remarry, produce an heir, otherwise the claim can be challenged. Understanding began to dawn cold and unwelcome. Elizabeth died 3 years ago. Donnelly continued. In 2 months, Nathaniel's deadline expires. If he doesn't have a wife and legitimate heir by then, his nephew Cormac can challenge the claim. And Cormac has hired lawyers from Helena. Good lawyers. They're preparing to file the moment the deadline passes. You brought me here to marry him. Judith's voice came out flat, empty. I brought you here to offer you a choice. Donnelly leaned forward. Sister Judith, Mother Superior, told me about your history, about Robert Ashford, about the medical diagnosis, about 3 years in a convent where you never quite fit. My shame burned through her. Everyone knew. Everyone always knew. I know what Philadelphia told you, Donnelly said gently, that you're too big, too wrong, incapable of being a wife or mother, that your only option was religious life, and even there you didn't belong. Judith couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. Nathaniel Blackwood needs a wife strong enough to survive Montana winters, a woman whose body can carry a child in conditions that killed his first wife. He needs someone built for survival, not decoration. Donnelly paused. And you need a chance to prove every cruel word you've ever heard wrong. The doctors said I can't have children. The doctors said a lot of things, but Sister Judith, I've spent 20 years on this frontier. I've seen women who Philadelphia would call too big, too rough, too wrong, bear healthy children when delicate society ladies couldn't. I've seen strength triumph where gentility failed. He poured the dregs of his coffee into the fire. You can go back to Philadelphia tomorrow. I'll escort you myself, no questions asked. Or you can ride with me to Nathaniel's wab and meet him, hear his proposal, and decide for yourself whether the doctors knew everything or whether they just knew their own narrow world. That night, lying in her bedroll under stars that seemed close enough to touch, Judith stared at the vast Montana sky. A different kind of life, the Philadelphia doctor had said. This was certainly different, different enough to be terrifying. But hadn't she been terrified every day in the convent? Hadn't Philadelphia been its own kind of prison walls built from whispers and pitying glances? She pulled Agnes's journal from her pack and wrote by moonlight, "Father Donnelly says I have a choice. Marry a stranger who needs an heir, or return to a city that has no place for me. Is this freedom, or just a different cage?" But even as she wrote the words, something stirred in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, more like curiosity. What would a man who specifically requested her size, her strength, her supposed defects, what would such a man be like? The second day's ride took them higher into the mountains. The trail, barely visible in places, wound through pine forests so dense the sunlight came in shafts. They crossed streams running cold and clear. They passed game trails marked by deer tracks and the enormous paw prints of grizzly bears. "This is Nathaniel's territory," Donnelly said, gesturing at the surrounding forest. "He traps from here to the high passes. Beaver, mink, marten. The furs bring good money in Helena. He's not a poor man, Sister Judith. He's just isolated, and time is running out." As if summoned by the words, a cabin appeared in a clearing ahead. Solid log construction mud chinked against the cold. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A small barn stood nearby, and animal pelts hung drying on wooden racks. The whole place spoke of competence, of a man who knew how to survive alone. A figure emerged from the cabin as they rode into the clearing, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the economy of someone who wasted no energy. He wore buckskin trousers and a wool shirt, both well-made and practical. His face was weathered by sun and wind beer, full but trimmed. His eyes, the color of mountain lakes, assessed Judith with the same cool evaluation she'd seen in buyers examining livestock. "Father Donnelly." His voice was deep, rough from disuse. Mountain men didn't talk much when they lived alone. "Nathaniel." Donnelly dismounted. "This is Sister Judith Whitmore, from Philadelphia." "Sister." Nathaniel Blackwood inclined his head. Then with brutal directness, "You'll do." Judith felt heat flood her face. "Excuse me?" "You're taller than I expected, broader through the shoulders." "Good." Elizabeth was tiny, delicate. This land ate her alive. He walked a slow circle around Judith's horse, examining her like a man considering a purchase. "Father Donnelly, you said she was told she's barren." "Nathaniel, perhaps we should discuss this inside." Donnelly's discomfort showed. "Why, either she's here to consider my proposal or she's not. No sense wasting time on niceties." Nathaniel stopped in front of Judith's horse, looking up at her. "I need a wife who can work this land, haul water, chop wood, handle livestock. I need a woman whose body can carry a child to term in conditions that would kill softer women. And I need it done in 2 months or I lose everything I've built." The words should have offended her, should have made her feel like livestock being evaluated. But his eyes held no cruelty, only the desperate pragmatism of a man running out of options. "The doctors in Philadelphia declared me incapable of childbearing." Judith said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "My pelvis is malformed. My womb is tilted. Even if I could conceive, which they said was unlikely, carrying a child would endanger my life." Philadelphia doctors know Philadelphia women. Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. They know corseted ladies who can't walk a mile without fainting. They don't know Montana. They don't know women who can survive winters that freeze cattle standing. He turned to Father Donnelly. "Leave us. I need to speak with Sister Judith alone." Donnelly hesitated. "Nathaniel, propriety. Propriety won't save my land claim. Privacy will let her hear my offer without a priest hovering." Nathaniel's tone left no room for argument. "Go check the trap line on the East Ridge. Come back at sunset. We'll have an answer by then." After a long moment, Donnelly nodded. He rode away, leaving Judith alone with this stranger who spoke of marriage like a business transaction. Nathaniel helped her dismount. His hands on her waist were strong, calloused, completely matter-of-fact. He showed no reaction to her size, her weight. She might have been any woman to him. Inside, the cabin was spare but well-maintained. One large room with a fireplace, a table and two chairs, a bed in the corner covered with furs. Shelves held supplies and equipment. Everything spoke of someone who lived deliberately wasting nothing. Coffee. Nathaniel moved to the fire adding wood without waiting for her answer. Judith remained standing near the door, acutely aware she was alone with a man in his cabin. A breach of every rule she'd lived by for 3 years. "I'm not here to attack you," Nathaniel said, reading her tension. "I'm here to make you an offer. Sit down. Let me speak plainly, and then you can decide." She sat. The chair creaked under her weight, and old shame prickled through her. But Nathaniel showed no reaction. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one before her. Then he sat across the table, his eyes never leaving her face. "My first wife, Elizabeth, was 5 feet tall, pretty as a spring flower, sweet and gentle. She loved me enough to follow me into these mountains even though she wasn't built for this life." His voice roughened. "She got pregnant 3 times. Lost the first 2 before they quickened. The third made it to term, but the baby was breech. Too big for her narrow hips. She labored for 20 hours. Judith's throat tightened. The midwife, Mrs. Carson, tried everything, couldn't turn the baby. Had to choose between cutting Elizabeth open or letting them both die. I chose to save Elizabeth." He stared into his coffee. "But the cutting damaged something inside her. She bled out before we could stop it. The baby was already dead. Had been for hours," Mrs. Carson said. "I'm sorry. I buried them together. Couldn't stand to separate them. That was 3 years ago." Nathaniel looked up, and the pain in his eyes was raw. "I brought Elizabeth out here because I wanted to build something permanent, a legacy. She came because she loved me, and my dream of land and legacy killed her. That's not your fault, isn't it?" His laugh held no humor. "I knew she wasn't strong enough. I knew these mountains would be hard on her. But I wanted what I wanted. Love doesn't keep you alive in Montana, Sister Judith. Strength does. Capability does. Stubbornness does." He stood and walked to the shelves, pulling down a leather document case. From it, he withdrew papers, spreading them on the table. "This is my land claim, 5,000 acres of prime Montana territory. I've built this cabin of barn corrals. I've established trap lines that produce $3,000 worth of furs annually. This land could support a family of 10, could become a real ranch with cattle and horses and crops. But your nephew wants to take it. Cormac, my sister Rebecca's son." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Rebecca married poorly. Her husband was a drunk who beat her. She wrote to me twice asking for help. I sent money both times. "But you didn't go to her." "I was 27 building this claim from nothing, barely surviving winters myself. I thought money would be enough. I thought she'd leave on her own if she had resources." His hands curled into fists. "She didn't leave. 3 years after her second letter, her husband beat her to death. Cormac was 13, found his mother's body." Judith's chest ached. "I offered to take Cormac in. He refused. Went to his father's brother, instead another drunk bastard. Spent the next 22 years blaming me for not saving his mother." Nathaniel looked at Judith. "He's not wrong. I failed Rebecca. I chose this land over family. Now Cormac wants to make sure my choice costs me everything. And if you produce an heir, he loses his claim." "Exactly. The land stays with me and passes to my legitimate children." Nathaniel gathered the papers, returned them to the case. "So here's my offer, Sister Judith. Marry me. Try to conceive. If you succeed in carrying a child to term, you inherit half this land regardless of what happens to me. Your child inherits the rest. If you can't conceive or if something goes wrong, I'll give you $2,000, enough to live independently for years. You'll never have to return to Philadelphia unless you choose to. And if I refuse, then Father Donnelly takes you back to Helena tomorrow. No hard feelings. You go back to your convent, I lose my land to Cormac, and we both continue as we were." He met her eyes. "But Sister Judith, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to be Elizabeth. I'm not looking for gentle or sweet or any of those things Philadelphia values. I'm looking for strong, for capable, for a woman built to survive what this land demands. You're looking for a broodmare. No, well," his voice sharpened. "I'm looking for a partner, for someone who can stand beside me when winter buries this cabin in snow, for someone whose strength matches mine instead of requiring my constant protection. Elizabeth needed me to take care of her every moment. It exhausted us both. I think you could take care of yourself. Maybe even take care of both of us when I need it. The words stirred something in Judith's chest. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar. When was the last time anyone had said they needed her strength rather than apologizing for it? The doctors said I'm malformed. And maybe they're right. Maybe you can't conceive. Maybe trying will be for nothing. Nathaniel leaned forward. But what if they're wrong? What if your body is exactly what it needs to be, and Philadelphia just didn't have a place for it? Don't you want to know? I've spent 3 years in a convent trying not to want things. And has it worked? Have you stopped wanting? When she didn't answer, he nodded. I thought not. So here's the choice plainly stated. Stay in Montana. Marry me. Try to conceive an heir. Prove Philadelphia wrong or prove them right, but at least you'll know. At least you'll have tried. He paused. Or go back east. Spend the rest of your life wondering if the doctors were right or if you just never got the chance to test their verdict. Judith stood walking to the cabin's small window. Outside, the mountains rose in every direction, stone giants capped with the snow even in September. The land was hard here, brutal, unforgiving, but it was also clean, honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Unlike Philadelphia, which hid its cruelty behind politeness. Unlike the convent, which wrapped rejection in the language of God's will. How much time do I have to decide? Father Donnelly returns at sunset. If you agree, we marry immediately. He's brought the license and dispensation. You'd need to write to your mother superior requesting release from your vows. Donnelly says she'll grant it. Apparently you never took final vows. I was still in discernment. Then discern this. What does God want from you to hide in a convent where you don't fit, or to build something here in a place so big it doesn't care about your size? Judith turned from the window. Nathaniel Blackwood stood in the center of his cabin waiting. He wasn't handsome like Robert Ashford had been. His face was too weathered, his hands too scarred. But his eyes held something Robert's never had. Respect. Not for what she could be if she changed, for what she already was. If I marry you, I need you to understand something. Judith's voice came out stronger than she expected. I've spent my whole life being told I'm wrong, too big, too strong, too inadequate for what women should be. I came here believing I was broken. If I stay, if I try this and I fail, it will destroy me. Do you understand that I do? And you're still asking. I am, because Sister Judith, I don't believe you'll fail. I believe every person who told you that was measuring you against the wrong standard. He moved closer but stopped an arm's length away, respecting her space. Philadelphia wanted you to be Elizabeth, delicate and decorative. But this land needs what Philadelphia rejects. It needs women who can survive. And you're built to survive. The words cracked something open in Judith's chest, some wall she'd built over 5 years of rejection. For the first time since Robert Ashford walked out of their wedding, she felt something like possibility. I want 24 hours, she said. Time to pray, to think, to decide without you watching me. That's reasonable. Nathaniel moved to the door. I'll go check the north trap line. Give you privacy. Father Donnelly won't be back until sunset anyway. He paused with his hand on the door. One more thing. If you decide yes, I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. I will try to get you pregnant as quickly as possible. Every night if necessary. We don't have time for slow courtship. 2 months to conceive and show early signs. That's the timeline. Can you handle that kind of intensity? Heat flooded Judith's face, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. If I agree to everything. I'm not a child, Mr. Blackwood. I understand what marriage entails. Good. Then I'll leave you to your prayers. He stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone in the cabin, Judith sank into the chair. Her hands trembled. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. She'd known this man for less than an hour. He was proposing a business arrangement disguised as marriage, asking her to risk everything on the chance that Philadelphia had been wrong. But hadn't Philadelphia always been wrong about her? They'd said she was too big for society. She was. They'd said she'd never find a husband who could accept her size. Robert Ashford had proven that true. They'd said her only option was religious life. The convent had rejected that certainty. What if they were wrong about her body too? Judith pulled Agnes's journal from her pack. She wrote, Nathaniel Blackwood has offered me a choice. Prove I'm broken or prove I'm whole. Risk everything or risk nothing. Stay safe in Philadelphia's pity or test myself against Montana's truth. She stared at the words. Then underneath she wrote, what if my body isn't broken? What if it's just different? What if different is exactly what this place needs? The sun moved across the sky outside the window. Judith paced the cabin. She prayed, though the prayers felt more like arguments with God. She thought about Elizabeth buried in Montana soil, about Rebecca dead because her brother sent money instead of himself, about all the women whose lives had been shaped by men's choices. And she thought about having a choice herself. Real choice, not Philadelphia's version, where every option led to the same cage. When Father Donnelly returned at sunset, Judith met him outside. Nathaniel stood by the barn waiting. I've made my decision. Judith's voice carried across the clearing. Strong, certain, terrifying in its finality. Nathaniel walked toward her. His face revealed nothing. I'll marry you, Judith said, but I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this just for the land or the money or the chance to prove doctors wrong. She took a breath. I'm doing this because for the first time in my life, someone is asking for my strength instead of apologizing for it. Someone sees my size as asset rather than defect. And whether I can have children or not, I want to know what that feels like. To be wanted for who I am, not despite who I am. Nathaniel's expression shifted. Something like relief crossed his weathered features. Then we understand each other. Father Donnelly stepped forward. You're certain, Sister Judith, marriage is a sacrament. Even this marriage of necessity, it binds you before God. I'm certain, Father. More certain than I've been of anything since Robert Ashford walked away. Then I'll need you to write to Mother Superior tonight, requesting release from your vows, and you'll need to remove your habit. Donnelly's voice gentled. You can't marry as a nun, child. You need to step into this new life completely. That night, by lantern light, Judith wrote the letter. Reverend Mother, would I write to request formal release from my preliminary vows? I am remaining in Montana territory to marry. This is not a rejection of God's call, but an answer to a different calling. One I didn't know existed until I arrived here. Thank you for sending me west. In doing so, you freed me to find where I truly belong. Respectfully, Judith Whitmore. When she finished, she looked at the habit hanging on a peg by the door. 3 years she'd worn it. 3 years of believing it was her only option. Tomorrow she would remove it forever. The wedding took place at sunset with the mountains burning gold and red around them. Father Donnelly performed the ceremony on the cabin's small porch. Nathaniel wore clean clothes, his beard freshly trimmed. Judith wore the wool trousers and shirt from Helena, her hair uncovered for the first time in 3 years. The vows were simple, traditional, but when Nathaniel spoke his part, he added words that weren't in any ceremony Father Donnelly knew. I promise to treat you as partner, not property, to respect your strength, to never make you feel small for being large, to never ask you to be anything other than exactly what you are. Judith's throat tightened. She managed her own addition. I promise to try, to give this everything I have, to prove that broken can become whole, or at least to know the truth of myself. I now pronounce you man and wife. Father Donnelly made the sign of the cross. May God bless this union and make it fruitful. As the words fell away, Judith reached for the ties of her habit. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. She removed the veil first, then the scapular, then the tunic. Piece by piece, she shed the identity Philadelphia had given her, the identity that had never quite fit. When she stood in just her simple wool clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders, the mountain wind touched her face like a benediction. Sister Judith Whitmore was gone. In her place stood simply Judith Blackwood, a woman who had chosen the mountains over the convent, a man who needed strength over a city that wanted her invisible, a future unknown over a past that offered only certainty of rejection. Father Donnelly departed the next morning, promising to return in 3 months. To see how you're settling in, he said, but his eyes held a different message. To see if you are with child, to see if this gamble pays off. After he rode away, Judith stood alone with her new husband. the man she'd known for one day, the man whose child she was meant to carry, the man who had looked at her and seen salvation rather than defect. Nervous? Nathaniel asked. Terrified. Good. Fear means you understand what's at stake. He moved toward the barn. Come on, time to teach you how to survive Montana. You'll need to know how to handle a rifle, how to recognize game trails, how to read weather in the mountains, how to keep yourself alive when I'm gone checking trap lines. Now we're starting now. We have 2 months, Judith, maybe less. Cormac could challenge the claim early if he learns you're here. Every day matters. Every skill matters. He paused at the barn door. And tonight after supper, we'll start working on the other part. The air. Is that acceptable? Heat flooded her face again, but she forced herself to nod. It's what I agreed to. Then let's not waste daylight. The day passed in a blur of new information. Nathaniel taught her to load and fire his rifle. The kick bruised her shoulder, but by the 10th shot, she hit the target dead center. He showed her animal tracks in the mud by the creek. Deer, elk, bear, mountain, and lion, each with its own signature, its own threat level. He explained weather patterns, how clouds against the peaks meant snow within hours, how the wind's direction told you if a storm was coming. Through it all, he treated her like a student, not a burden, asked if she understood, corrected her mistakes without judgment, acknowledged her quick learning with brief nods of approval. By sunset, Judith's body ached from unaccustomed exercise, but her mind felt clearer than it had in years. She'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible in the convent. Here, invisibility would kill her. Here, she had to be present, capable, strong. They ate in silence, venison stew with root vegetables, biscuits Nathaniel made himself. The food was simple but good fuel for hard work rather than entertainment. After the dishes were washed and put away, the silence grew heavier. Judith knew what came next, had known since accepting his proposal. But knowing and doing were different countries. Nathaniel banked the fire and lit a single lamp. I'll give you privacy to change. There are night clothes in the trunk, Elizabeth's, but you can wear them if you want. Or not, whatever's comfortable. He walked to the door. I'll be outside for 10 minutes. That enough time? Yes. When he left, Judith opened the trunk. Elizabeth's nightgown lay folded on top, white cotton with delicate embroidery. She held it up. Tiny. Made for a woman half Judith's size. Even if she'd wanted to wear it, it wouldn't fit. Instead, she undressed down to her chemise, washed her face and hands in the basin, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her heart hammered. Her hands shook. This was madness. She barely knew this man. And yet in less than 10 minutes, she would give him access to her body. Would try to conceive a child Philadelphia said was impossible. The door opened. Nathaniel entered, closing it quietly behind him. He'd removed his shirt. Scars crossed his chest and arms, white lines against tan skin. Burn marks, claw marks from some animal attack. Knife wounds. His body told stories of survival. Still willing? He asked. Still terrified. That won't change tonight. He crossed to the bed and sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. Judith, I need you to understand something before we start this. I'm not gentle. I don't have soft words or romantic gestures, but I will never hurt you deliberately. And if you say stop at any point, I stop. Agreed. Agreed. One more thing. He took her hand. His calluses rasped against her palm. Elizabeth and I married for love. I cared for her deeply. What you and I have, it's different. But that doesn't make it less. Partnership matters as much as passion. Maybe more out here where survival depends on working together. The words should have stung, should have reminded her this was transaction, not love story. But instead, they steadied her. He wasn't pretending, wasn't offering false romance to make the business arrangement easier. He was being honest. And honesty, Judith had learned, was rarer than gold. I understand. Then lie back. Let me show you what this marriage means. What followed was awkward and uncomfortable and nothing like the wedding night she'd imagined as a girl. But it was also real. Two bodies learning each other. Two strangers becoming something more than strangers, if not quite lovers. Nathaniel was patient, deliberate, asking if she was all right more than once. And when it was over, when they lay in the darkness catching their breath, Judith felt something she hadn't expected. Not shame, not regret, but a strange kind of peace. Her body had functioned, had responded, had done what Philadelphia said it couldn't do or shouldn't do or wasn't built to do. Maybe conception would follow. Maybe it wouldn't. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt her body belonged to her again. Not to doctors or Robert Ashford or Mother Superior, just to her. Sleep, Nathaniel said quietly. Tomorrow we'll start building your strength, teaching you everything Elizabeth couldn't learn, making you into the kind of woman who survives Montana. Judith closed her eyes. And in the darkness of the cabin, listening to her husband's breathing and the wind in the pines outside, she wrote a silent prayer. Not to be perfect, not to prove anyone right or wrong, just to be strong enough for whatever came next. Because Montana, she was learning, didn't care about Philadelphia's standards. Montana cared only about one thing. Could you survive? And Judith Blackwood born, Whitmore formerly, Sister Judith had just bet everything that the answer was yes. The first month passed in a rhythm of work and learning. Judith's hands, soft from convent life, blistered and hardened. Her muscles, unused to hauling water and splitting wood, burned and strengthened. Every morning she woke before dawn to tend the animals. Every evening she fell into bed exhausted, her body aching in new places. And every night, true to his word, Nathaniel claimed his husbandly rights with methodical determination. They didn't speak of love. Love was a luxury for people with time. They had 2 months, maybe less if Cormac moved quickly. So they worked, they prepared, they tried. 3 weeks after the wedding, Judith's monthly bleeding came. She woke to cramping and the familiar dampness that meant failure. She lay still in the pre-dawn darkness, tears sliding into her hair. Philadelphia had been right after all. Nathaniel stirred beside her. It came, she couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. We have 5 more weeks. His voice held no judgment, no disappointment, just pragmatic acceptance. Elizabeth didn't conceive for 6 months of trying. Bodies have their own timing. What if my body's timing is never then we deal with that when it comes. For now, we keep trying. He rose, dressed in the darkness with practiced efficiency. Get up. Cattle need feeding. Self-pity doesn't survive long on a mountain. The words were harsh, but they steadied her. He wasn't coddling her, wasn't treating her like she was fragile or broken. He was treating her like a partner who needed to pull her weight regardless of biology. By the time the sun rose, Judith had her emotions locked down tight. Work was the answer, work and time. And if neither produced a child, at least she would know she'd tried everything. Near the end of the second month, Nathaniel announced they were riding to the trading post. Monthly supply run, flour, coffee, salt, things we can't produce ourselves. He saddled both horses. It's a 2-day journey round trip. You'll meet the frontier community. Some will be kind, some won't. Steel yourself. The ride to Brennan's trading post took them down the mountain and across rolling foothills. They passed other homesteads, cabins scattered across the landscape like seeds thrown by a careless hand. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played in dirt yards. Women hung laundry while men worked fields or repaired fences. The rhythm of frontier life, hard and unrelenting. The trading post sat at a crossroads where 3 trails converged. A large log building with a covered porch corrals out back and a small cemetery on the hillside. The cemetery told its own story. Too many small graves. Too many women who hadn't survived childbirth. Too many men killed by accident or violence or simple bad luck. A dozen horses stood tied to the hitching rail. Voices carried from inside the rough sound of men trading news and gossip. Nathaniel helped Judith dismount, his hands steady on her waist. Remember, they'll stare. They'll talk. Let them. Words can't hurt you unless you give them permission. He met her eyes. You're my wife. That gives you standing here. Use it. Inside, the trading post smelled of coffee and tobacco and the unwashed bodies of men who lived far from civilization's niceties. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything a frontier household might need. Sacks of flour and sugar, bolts of cloth, tools and weapons, medicine and whiskey. Behind the counter stood a woman who looked carved from the same granite as the mountains. 50 years old maybe, with iron gray hair, pulled back severely, and eyes that missed nothing. She assessed Judith with one long glance, then nodded. So you're the nun Nate married? Her voice carried across the room, silencing other conversations. Heard it said you were too big for Philadelphia society. Out here we measure different. Can you shoot? Every eye in the room turned to Judith. She felt the weight of judgment, the same assessment she'd faced her entire life. Too tall, too broad, too wrong. But Montana measured different. Yes, ma'am, I can shoot. Can you skin a deer? Learning. Can you handle a winter that buries this building in snow? I intend to find out. The woman's face cracked into something almost like a smile. Abigail Brennan, I run this post. Been here 20 years, buried 2 husbands, raised 5 children. She extended a work-roughened hand across the counter. Anyone who can handle Nate Blackwood has my respect. That man's harder than winter. Judith shook her hand. The grip was firm, testing. Elizabeth was sweet, Abigail continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Sweet as spring flowers. But flowers don't last in Montana. You got the look of a woman who bends instead of breaks. Good. We need more of that out here. The endorsement settled over Judith like a cloak. She saw it in the faces around her. The frontier wives nodding approval, the men reassessing their initial judgments. In Philadelphia, size had been her curse. Here it might be her salvation. While Nathaniel conducted business, Judith wandered the trading post. She examined bolts of cloth, sturdy calico and wool, rather than the silks of Philadelphia. She studied the medical supplies, recognizing herbs and tinctures from her convent training. She watched how people interacted, the rough courtesy of the frontier, where survival depended on neighbors helping neighbors. A woman approached her, young and heavily pregnant. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Mary Henderson. My husband farms 5 miles south of your claim. She touched her swollen belly. This is my first. I'm frightened. They say childbirth kills more women than anything out here. Judith saw herself in the woman's eyes. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that her body might betray her. When are you due? January, dead of winter. The midwife, Mrs. Carson, might not be able to reach us if the snow's too deep. I have medical training from the convent. If you need help, send your husband. I'll come if I can. The words came out before Judith thought them through, but they felt right. If her body couldn't create life, perhaps she could help preserve it. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. God bless you. The door slammed open. A man entered, tall and lean, with the kind of handsomeness that came from good bone structure rather than good living. His clothes were fine by frontier standards, his boots barely scuffed. He moved through the trading post like he owned it, though his eyes held the desperate brightness of someone barely holding together. Cormac Blackwood. Judith knew him instantly, though they'd never met. The resemblance to Nathaniel showed in the jaw, the cheekbones. But where Nathaniel's face showed strength earned through hardship, Cormac's showed potential squandered. Well, Cormac's voice carried across the room. The famous Amazon bride. All the way from Philadelphia, I hear. How desperate my uncle must be. Nathaniel stepped forward, his body language pure threat. Get out, Cormac. This is a public establishment, uncle. I have as much right to trade here as you. Cormac's smile held malice. Besides, I wanted to meet the woman you've imported to steal my inheritance. Your inheritance, Judith heard herself speak before caution could stop her. Land your uncle claimed and worked while you were doing what exactly? Cormac's eyes narrowed. Surviving poverty after my mother died, the poverty your husband helped create. Nathaniel sent money. Money, Cormac spat the word. My mother needed family, protection, someone to stand between her and my father's fists. Instead, she got money. And when that money couldn't stop my father from beating her to death, I got the privilege of finding her body. The room had gone silent. Every person there knew this story, had heard some version. Family tragedy playing out in public as it always did in communities this small. I'm sorry for what happened to your mother, Judith said quietly. No child should experience what you experienced. But Cormac, you're not a child anymore. You're a grown man choosing bitterness over healing. Easy to preach when you're the one benefiting from my loss. I'm not benefiting. I'm trying to build something with the man I married. That's not theft, that's life. Built on the grave of what should have been mine. Cormac moved closer. Tell me, Mrs. Blackwood, how does it feel knowing you're just a broodmare, a last desperate attempt by an old man to keep land he doesn't deserve? Nathaniel's fist caught Cormac in the jaw before anyone could intervene. Cormac went down hard, blood spurting from his split lip. Men rushed to separate them, but Nathaniel stood over his nephew like a mountain. "You can hate me all you want," Nathaniel said, his voice deadly calm. "But speak of my wife with respect, or next time I won't stop with one punch." Cormac wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes bright with rage, and something else. Satisfaction. Like he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. "2 months, uncle. Then we'll see what the territorial court decides." He left, and with him went the easy atmosphere of the trading post. People returned to their business, but the tension remained. An older man approached wearing a brass badge pinned to his vest. Judge Thornton, Judith realized. The man who would decide their fate. "Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood," his voice carried the weight of law, "I've received a formal challenge to your land claim from Cormac Blackwood. The 6-month requirement under Montana Territory statutes is clear. You must demonstrate family establishment by November 15th, or the claim reverts to federal land available for new filing." "We're aware of the law, Your Honor." "Are you also aware that Cormac has hired legal counsel from Helena? They're preparing quite a case. Arguments about your age, about the suspicious timing of this marriage, about whether a union of mere weeks can constitute legitimate family establishment." Judge Thornton's gaze moved to Judith. "They'll question whether this marriage is genuine or a fraud designed to circumvent the law." "Our marriage is genuine," Judith said. "We may not have courted for years, but we're building a life together. That's more genuine than many marriages I've seen." "The court will require proof, a living child born or visibly on the way by the deadline. Can you provide such proof?" Judith's throat tightened. She couldn't promise what her body might not deliver. "We'll provide what the law requires," Nathaniel said. "One way or another." Judge Thornton nodded slowly. "I hope so, Mr. Blackwood. I truly do, but the law is the law. I can't bend it even for old acquaintances." He tipped his hat and moved away. The ride back to the cabin felt longer than the journey down. Nathaniel rode in silence, his jaw tight with anger and worry. Judith's mind churned with everything she'd learned. The community that might accept her. The judge who wouldn't bend rules. Cormac's bitter determination to take what he believed was his. And underneath it all, the terrible knowledge that her body remained empty, that Philadelphia's diagnosis might prove correct after all. They made camp beside a creek as the sun touched the western peaks. Nathaniel built a fire and set coffee to boil. The domestic ritual steadied them both. "Tell me about Rebecca," Judith said when they had eaten. "Not the tragedy, the woman herself. What was she like?" Nathaniel stared into the fire for a long moment. "She was 7 years younger than me. Beautiful, gentle, everything our rough father wasn't. He died when I was 19, left us the family farm in Virginia. Not much of a farm, exhausted soil debts, no future. You left. I went west to trap, sent money home every season. Thought Rebecca would keep the farm going, find a decent husband, build something stable." His voice roughened. "Instead, she married Thomas Harding, a charmer, good-looking, smooth talker. I met him once, didn't like him. But Rebecca was in love, and I was 3 territories away. What could I do? You could have gone home. I was 24 years old, living in the mountains, making more money in one season than I'd seen in my entire life. I thought money solved everything. Thought if I sent enough, Rebecca could hire help, could make the farm profitable, could buy herself security. But Thomas drank and gambled and hit her when things went wrong. She wrote me twice. The first time I sent $200, enough to leave him start over somewhere else. She wrote back saying she'd used it to pay Thomas's debts that he'd promised to change." Judith's chest ached. She'd seen this pattern before in Philadelphia. Women trapped by love and hope and the terrible belief that they could fix broken men. The second letter came 3 years later. Said Thomas was worse. Said she feared for her life. Said, "Please, Nathaniel, come get me in Cormac." His hands clenched into fists. "I sent $500 that time. Told her to hire a wagon to leave immediately to come to Montana where I could protect her. She didn't come. She wrote that Thomas found the money, took it, bought a saloon with 2 partners, said it would make their fortune. Said she couldn't leave it now, not when things were finally turning around. And then he killed her. Beat her to death over a card game gone wrong. Came home drunk and violent, and Rebecca was there. Nathaniel's voice cracked. Cormac was 13, heard the whole thing from the next room. Tried to stop his father, got knocked unconscious for his trouble. When he woke up, his mother was dead and his father was passed out drunk beside her body. Thomas went to trial. Hanged 3 months later. Public execution. Cormac watched. Nathaniel looked at Judith, his eyes haunted. I went back to Virginia for the trial. Offered to take Cormac in, give him a home, a future. He looked at me with such hate. Said if I'd come when his mother asked, she'd still be alive. Said money wasn't help, it was cowardice. Said he'd rather stay with his father's brother than accept charity from the man who let his mother die. He was a child in pain. He was right. I chose this land over family. I chose building something of my own over protecting someone who needed me. And it cost Rebecca her life. Nathaniel threw the dregs of his coffee into the fire. So when Cormac says I don't deserve this land, part of me agrees. I built it with money that should have saved his mother. Every acre is soaked in my failure. Judith moved around the fire and sat beside him. She took his scarred hand in hers. You made a mistake. You were young, didn't understand the depth of danger Rebecca faced. But Nathaniel, you can't undo the past. You can only choose what you do now. Now I'm asking you to risk your life giving me an heir. Just like I asked Elizabeth. Just like I failed to save Rebecca. Everyone I care about, I put in danger. No, Judith's voice sharpened. I'm choosing this. Choosing to try, choosing to risk, choosing to prove Philadelphia wrong. Die trying. That's my choice, not your burden. Don't you dare take that from me by making it about your guilt. He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. You sound angry. I am angry. I'm angry that everyone in my life has made decisions for me. Doctors decided I was broken. Robert Ashford decided I was unmarriageable. Mother Superior decided I didn't belong. And now you're deciding I'm a victim. She squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. I'm not a victim. I'm a woman trying to build a life in a place that might actually let me. So stop protecting me from your guilt and start treating me like the partner you said you needed. A slow smile crossed Nathaniel's weathered face. Elizabeth never talked to me like that. I'm not Elizabeth. Remember, I'm starting to. He pulled her close, his arms solid around her. You're right. This is your choice, your risk, your chance to prove everyone wrong. He pressed his forehead against hers. So let's get you pregnant and shove the proof in every doubter's face. They returned to the cabin the next day to find a visitor waiting. A man sitting on the porch steps like he owned them, a rifle resting casually across his knees. He stood as they approached, moving with the economy of someone who wasted no energy. Remy, Nathaniel's voice warmed, wondered when you'd show up. Jeremiah Thornwood was everything mountain hard. 50 years old, maybe lean as a wolf with pale eyes that missed nothing. His clothes were buckskin and wool handmade and worn smooth. A Scots-Irish accent flavored his sparse words. Heard you married. Remy's gaze moved to Judith, assessing. Built sturdy? Good. Elizabeth was China doll. This one's iron. Judith, this is Remy Thornwood. Best tracker in the territory and my oldest friend out here. Judith dismounted and extended her hand. Remy shook at his grip testing. When she didn't flinch, he nodded approval. Mountains don't care if you're man or woman, Remy said. Only care if you survive. You'll survive. They sat on the porch while the sun climbed toward noon. Remy spoke little, but what he said mattered. He'd spent 25 years in these mountains learning their rhythms and rules. He'd seen strong men die from stupid mistakes and fragile women survive through sheer stubbornness. Folks back in civilization got rules about what women should be. Remy set his pale eyes on Judith. Mountains got one rule. Be strong enough not to die. You're strong enough. The simple acceptance steadied something in Judith's chest. Another person seeing her strength as asset rather than defect. But Remy's news was less comforting. Saw your nephew in Helena. He's talking to rough men, hired guns. Whatever he's planning, it's coming soon. Watch your back. After Remy left, promising to return in a month, Nathaniel and Judith settled into the routine of work. But tension now underlay everything. Cormac wasn't content to wait for the court. He was planning something. 3 weeks later, Judith's monthly bleeding came again. The second month still barren. She cried silently in the darkness, her back to Nathaniel. But he heard anyway, felt the shaking of her shoulders. 4 months left. His voice was steady. Don't give up yet. But despair crept in like winter cold. What if Philadelphia had been right? What if trying was pointless? What if her body was as broken as everyone said? The morning after her bleeding stopped, Judith was working in the small garden when she heard the horses screaming. The sound cut through the mountain quiet like knives. She ran toward the barn, her heart hammering. Inside, chaos. 3 horses, thrashing in their stalls, foam at their mouths, eyes rolling white with pain and terror. Nathaniel was already there trying to calm them, trying to assess. Poison. His voice was flat, deadly. Water hemlock in the feed. They worked desperately to save the animals. Forced charcoal water down their throats to absorb the poison. Walked them to keep their systems moving. But the mare, the beautiful roan Judith had ridden from Helena, went down convulsing. Died with her head in Judith's lap, brown eyes going glassy with death. Nathaniel buried her behind the barn. His face was stone, but his hands shook with rage. Cormac! Judith said it as fact, not question. Footprints lead south, toward his camp. Nathaniel reached for his rifle. Judith grabbed his arm. No, that's what he wants. If you kill him, the land automatically passes to his estate. You become a murderer, he becomes a martyr, and I'm left with nothing. So we do nothing. We document everything. Keep evidence. Build a case for Judge Thornton. She forced herself to think strategically to push down grief and rage. Cormac wants you emotional, wants you to make a mistake. Don't give him the satisfaction. That night they set up watch rotations, took turns through the dark hours listening for sounds that didn't belong, protecting what they'd built against a threat that could come from any direction. 4 days later, Cormac arrived, bold as brass, riding up to the cabin in broad daylight. He carried a bundle wrapped in cloth, and his smile was poison. Uncle, Mrs. Blackwood. He dismounted with exaggerated courtesy. I heard about your mare. Tragic. These mountains are dangerous for those who don't know them well. Say what you came to say and leave. Nathaniel's hand rested on his rifle. I brought a gift for Mrs. Blackwood, an apology for my harsh words at the trading post. Cormac extended the bundle. Information I thought she should have. Research about her condition. Judith's stomach clenched, but she took the bundle. Inside was a medical journal from a Philadelphia hospital. Pages marked with slips of paper. Articles about women of unusual sin and reproductive difficulties. Her hands shook as she read the highlighted passages. Tilted wombs, malformed pelvises, high rates of maternal mortality in women over 6 feet tall, statistics showing that large women conceived at lower rates and died in childbirth at higher rates than their smaller counterparts. Everything Philadelphia had told her now backed by published research. I found this researching you, Cormac said, his voice falsely sympathetic. Thought you should know what you were up against. Those doctors? They weren't wrong. Women built like you, the reproductive system doesn't work right. Your baby, if you even conceive, will likely kill you in childbirth. Get out, Judith's voice came from somewhere deep and cold. Think about it, Mrs. Blackwood. Is proving doctors wrong worth dying for? Because that's what you're risking. Your life for my uncle's land claim. Out now. After he left, Judith read every marked article. Each one confirmed her worst fears. Each one said her body was wrong, inadequate, dangerous. By the time Nathaniel found her, she was sobbing, the journal clutched to her chest like evidence of her own defectiveness. What did he give you? She showed him. Watched his face harden as he read. This is meant to break you, Nathaniel said finally, to make you afraid, to make you give up trying. What if it's true? What if it is? He knelt before her, his hands on her shoulders. Judith, you came to Montana knowing you might fail, knowing your body might not do what we need it to do. Has that changed? No. Then this changes nothing. We keep trying, keep working, keep building a life here regardless of what happens. He took the journal and threw it into the fire. Philadelphia doesn't get to tell you who you are. Not anymore. That night, something shifted in Judith. Fear gave way to determination. She'd spent her entire life believing what others said about her. Doctors Robert Ashford, Mother Superior, now Cormac, all of them telling her she was wrong, broken, inadequate. But what if they were all measuring her against the wrong standard? Philadelphia wanted women like Elizabeth. Small, delicate, decorative. Montana needed something different. And Judith was tired of apologizing for being different. I'm done being afraid, she said to Nathaniel before they slept. Done letting other people's predictions shape my life. I have 4 months. I'm going to spend them living fully, working hard and trying to conceive. And if I fail, at least I'll know I didn't fail from lack of trying. I failed because my body wasn't built for it, and I'll accept that truth. But I won't accept defeat before the battle is even fought. Nathaniel pulled her close. That's my Montana woman talking. I'm not Montana yet, but I'm getting there. The third month brought autumn in earnest. Leaves turned gold and red in the valleys. Snow dusted the high peaks. Animals grew thick winter coats. The land prepared for the brutal season ahead. Nathaniel took Judith on her first big game hunt. They tracked a bull elk for 2 days, learning to read sign in the frost-covered earth. Nathaniel taught her patience, how to wait hours in absolute stillness for the perfect shot. Taught her to read wind and terrain and animal behavior. When the moment came, Judith's shot took the elk clean through the heart. It went down with minimal suffering. Nathaniel's approval showed in the brief nod he gave her. They spent hours field dressing the animal, packing meat for transport. Judith's strength proved invaluable. She could carry heavy quarters without complaint. Her steady hands helped with the delicate work of butchering. That night, camped under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Nathaniel opened up in a way he hadn't before. Elizabeth couldn't watch blood, couldn't stomach the reality of where meat came from. He fed sticks to their small fire. She was good in so many ways, kind, gentle, devoted. But frontier life requires a different kind of strength, the willingness to do hard things, to kill when necessary, to butcher, to survive without flinching. You blame yourself for her death. I brought her out here knowing she wasn't suited for it. My dream of land and legacy killed her. She chose to come. She chose you. That's not your fault. She was in labor for 20 hours. His voice roughened with memory. Mrs. Carson tried everything. The baby was breeched too large for Elizabeth's hips. Had to choose between cutting her open to save the baby or letting them both die. I chose Elizabeth. Judith's throat tightened, but the cutting damaged something inside her. She bled out before we could stop it. Baby was already dead. Had been for hours, Mrs. Carson said. He stared into the fire. I buried them in the same grave. Couldn't stand to separate them. Mother and child together in Montana soil. I'm sorry. I tell you this because I need you to understand. If something goes wrong when you give birth, if there's a choice between you and the baby, I'm choosing you. Land claim be damned. I won't watch another woman die for my ambitions. That's not your choice to make. The hell it isn't. No. Judith moved around the fire, forcing him to look at her. If I'm lucky enough to conceive, if I'm lucky enough to carry a child to term, and if something goes wrong in delivery, you save the baby. You hear me? That baby is the whole point. Your legacy. The reason I'm here. You're here because I need a partner, not a brood mare. I'm both. And Nathaniel listened carefully. For the first time in my life, my body might do something that matters. Something important. If it costs me my life to bring that baby into the world, that's a trade I'm willing to make. I'm not willing. Then we disagree. She cupped his weathered face. But if it comes to that moment, if Mrs. Carson has to choose you, tell her to save the baby. Promise me. I can't. Promise me or I leave. I ride back to Helena tomorrow and you lose everything. They stared at each other across the firelight, two stubborn wills colliding. Finally, Nathaniel looked away. I promise to let Mrs. Carson make the decision a midwife should make. That's all I'll promise. It would have to be enough. They returned to the cabin to find winter's first serious snow falling. 3 inches overnight, more coming. The land transformed into white silence, beautiful and deadly. But something else had transformed too. Judith realized it the morning they returned. Nausea. Sudden, overwhelming nausea at the smell of the coffee Nathaniel was brewing. She ran outside and vomited in the snow. When she came back and saw it pale and shaking, Nathaniel was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. How late are you? 3 weeks, maybe 4. The nausea, is this the first time? No, it's been happening for days. I thought it was just eating too much game meat. Or elevation sickness. Judith, his voice was careful, controlled. You might be pregnant." The words hung between them like something fragile and precious. She was afraid to hope, afraid to believe. Philadelphia's diagnosis still echoed in her mind. Too broken, too wrong, incapable. We can't know for certain without a doctor. Mrs. Carson will know. She's delivered hundreds of babies. She'll be able to tell. Nathaniel moved toward the door. "I'm riding to get her. Don't do any heavy work while I'm gone. Rest. Eat. Take care of yourself. It's a 3-day journey round trip. And then you'll have 3 days to get used to the possibility that Philadelphia was wrong." He kissed her forehead, a gesture of unexpected tenderness. 3 days to imagine a future where you are not broken after all. He left in the snow, and Judith was alone with the possibility growing inside her. She placed a hand on her still flat belly and let herself for the first time hope. 3 days later, Nathaniel returned with Mrs. Abigail Carson. The midwife was everything mountain tough. 50 years old, weathered and strong, with hands that had caught more babies than Judith could count. She'd also buried 2 of her own children lost to illness and accident. Death and life walked hand in hand out here. "Let's have a look at you then." Mrs. Carson's examination was thorough and professional. She asked questions about Judith's cycle, her symptoms, her overall health. She pressed on Judith's belly, felt her breasts, looked at her tongue and eyes. Finally, she sat back. "You're pregnant. About 8 weeks along, I'd say." The world seemed to stop. Judith couldn't breathe, couldn't process. Pregnant. After being told it was impossible. After being called broken and malformed and inadequate. "Are you certain?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "As certain as I can be without waiting to see the baby born. Your womb is enlarged. Your breasts are tender and swollen. You're experiencing morning sickness, and you've missed 2 full cycles. Those are classic signs." Mrs. Carson's expression grew serious. "But Mrs. Blackwood, I need you to understand something. Being pregnant doesn't mean you'll carry to term. Women your size with your build, we face particular challenges. The doctors in Philadelphia said my pelvis is malformed. Philadelphia doctors see what they expect to see. I've delivered babies out here for 25 years, seen all kinds of bodies, all kinds of outcomes. Some big women have easy deliveries. Some struggle. Each body's different." She paused. "Your pelvis is narrow for your frame, that's true. And the baby will likely be large if it takes after your size. This won't be an easy birth, but I've seen harder. Will I survive? Can't predict that. I've seen strong women die from simple deliveries and fragile women survive complicated ones. Birth is always a gamble." Mrs. Carson's voice gentled. "But I'll be honest with you. You're at higher risk than smaller women. And if complications arise, decisions will need to be made. Fast decisions. Hard decisions." Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his face carved from stone. Judith met his eyes and saw the terror there. The memory of Elizabeth bleeding out on this very bed. "How long do we have?" Judith asked. "You're 8 weeks along. That puts you due in late May, early June. You have about 7 months. We'll need to monitor closely. I'll visit monthly more often as you get closer to term." Mrs. Carson began repacking her supplies. "And Mrs. Blackwood, don't do anything stupid. No heavy lifting. No riding if you can avoid it. No taking unnecessary risks. That baby needs you healthy and whole." After she left, Nathaniel and Judith sat at the table, hands clasped between them, the reality settling over them like snow. "You did it." Nathaniel's voice was rough. "You proved them wrong. I conceived. That's only the first step. Carrying to term is another matter entirely. You'll do it. You're built for survival." But even as he said it, they both knew the truth. Pregnancy was no guarantee. Women died. Babies died. Hope was a dangerous thing out here, where nature respected no one's dreams. That night, Judith wrote in her journal, "I am 8 weeks pregnant. Philadelphia was wrong about conception, but they may still be right about survival. 7 months to discover if my body can complete what it started. 7 months to prove I'm whole or learn I'm broken in different ways." She placed her hand on her belly, feeling nothing yet, but knowing life grew there regardless. A tiny spark of possibility. A gamble they'd both agreed to take. The 4th month brought more snow. The passes closed, cutting them off from Helena and the trading post. They were alone now, just the 2 of them, and the growing secret of Judith's pregnancy. Nathaniel became obsessively protective, wouldn't let her haul water or chop wood, insisted she rest every afternoon, checked on her constantly through the night, making sure she was breathing, making sure she was well. "You're suffocating me," Judith finally had said. "I'm pregnant, not dying." Elizabeth seemed fine until she wasn't. "I'm not Elizabeth." "I know, but I can't lose you too." The confession hung between them, and Judith realized something that startled her. Somewhere in the past 4 months, this arrangement had become real. This man who'd married her for land and legacy had come to care about her, not just as a means to an end, as a person. And she cared for him. His quiet strength, his brutal honesty, his willingness to see her as capable rather than damaged. It wasn't love, not the romantic kind, but it was partnership, respect, affection earned through shared hardship. Maybe that was enough. They fell into a rhythm dictated by winter's demands. Mornings, Nathaniel checked trap lines while Judith tended animals and prepared food. Afternoons, they worked on repairs, reinforcing the cabin against wind and cold. Evenings, they sat by the fire, Nathaniel reading scripture, while Judith taught him to write more than his name. The isolation brought intimacy, not physical with Judith pregnant, but emotional. They talked about their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Nathaniel shared stories of 15 years in these mountains, surviving blizzards and bears and loneliness that nearly broke him. Judith talked about Philadelphia, about feeling wrong her entire life, about the relief of finding a place where different meant useful rather than defective. Late one night deep in January, Judith woke to cramping, sharp pains in her belly that made her gasp. She lay still, terror flooding through her. Was she losing the baby? Was Philadelphia's prediction coming true after all? The pains intensified. She couldn't stay silent any longer. "Nathaniel." He was awake instantly. "What's wrong?" Cramping. Bad cramping. He lit the lamp with shaking hands. "How bad?" "Like labor. Like my body's trying to push something out." His face went white. He knew what this meant. Miscarriage. The baby dying before it had a chance to live. Elizabeth's story repeating. The contractions continued for an hour. Judith sweated and groaned and tried not to scream. Nathaniel held her hand, helpless to do anything but bear witness to her pain. Then, as suddenly as they'd started, the contractions stopped. Judith lay panting, exhausted, but no blood, no signs of miscarriage. "False labor," Nathaniel said, his voice shaking with relief. "Mrs. Carson mentioned it. The body practices for the real thing, tests itself. I thought I was losing the baby." "So did I." They held each other in the darkness, both understanding how fragile their hope was, how easily everything could be lost. The baby remained for now, but every day was a gamble, every month a victory. Winter deepened. The cabin became their entire world. Snow piled 6 feet high against the walls. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the bucket overnight. They burned through firewood at alarming rates, keeping the cold at bay. But inside, in the warmth and firelight, something grew between them that was stronger than romance. Trust. The knowledge that they would survive this together or not at all. That her strength supported his weaknesses and his experience compensated for her inexperience. That together they were more than the sum of their individual capabilities. One night in late February, as wind howled outside and snow piled higher, Nathaniel spoke the words Judith had been waiting for without knowing. "I won't let you die like Elizabeth died." "You can't make that promise." "Oh, I can try. When a Mrs. Carson comes in the spring, I'm going to tell her, if it's you or the baby, save you. Land claim be damned. I need you more than I need an heir." Tears streaked down Judith's face. Not from fear, from the realization that she mattered. Not her womb, not her size, not her utility. Her. The woman she was, scars and strength and stubborn determination. "Thank you," she whispered. "But Nathaniel, if it comes to that choice, I'm still choosing the baby. Because that's my choice to make. My body, my risk, my decision. Then we'll fight, both of us. You'll fight to survive, I'll fight to keep you, and that baby will come into a world where two stubborn people refuse to let Montana win." March arrived with signs of thaw. The snow began to retreat. The creek ran high with meltwater. Animals emerged from winter dens, life returning after months of cold and death. And Judith's belly grew. Not dramatically yet, but enough that her clothes no longer fit properly. Enough that she could feel the baby move tiny flutters that promised presence, promised possibility. 5 months pregnant, halfway there. And for the first time since accepting Nathaniel's proposal, Judith allowed herself to believe. Not that everything would be fine. Montana didn't promise fine, but that she had a fighting chance. That her body might actually do what Philadelphia said it couldn't. That broken might just be another word for different, and different might be exactly what survived. Spring arrived slowly in Montana territory. Snow retreated inch by stubborn inch, revealing earth that had been frozen for 6 months. Streams ran high and fast with meltwater. Animals emerged from winter dens, hungry and cautious, life returning to land that had seemed dead. And inside the Blackwood cabin, another kind of life prepared its arrival. Judith stood at the window in early May, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. 9 months pregnant now. Enormous. The baby shifted constantly, kicks and rolls that sometimes took her breath. Mrs. Carson had visited twice in April, pronouncing mother and child both healthy, but warning that the birth would be difficult. That baby's big, the midwife had said bluntly, 10 pounds, maybe more. Your pelvis is narrow. It's going to be a hard fight, Mrs. Blackwood, for both of you. Now with her due date days away, Judith felt the weight of what was coming. Not just the physical ordeal of birth, though, that terrified her, but the stakes. Everything they'd fought for rested on this child being born alive and healthy before November 15th. They had 6 months of margin, but babies came when they decided to come. And Cormac was waiting. He'd been quiet through the winter. Too quiet. Remy had stopped by in March with troubling news. Cormac had spent the winter in Helena, drinking and gambling and talking to men with violent reputations. He was planning something. And with Judith's delivery imminent, that something would happen soon. Come away from the window. Nathaniel's voice held the same tight control it had carried for weeks. He was terrified. She saw it every time he looked at her, remembering Elizabeth's death, imagining history repeating. I'm fine, the baby's fine, stop hovering. I'll stop hovering when you're not 9 months pregnant in the middle of nowhere with the nearest doctor 3 days away. Mrs. Carson is staying in the barn loft. She's been here a week. The moment labor starts, she'll be ready. She was ready for Elizabeth, too. Didn't help. Judith turned from the window and crossed to him. Moving was difficult now, her body ungainly with the weight of pregnancy. But she made it to where he sat at the table, hands clenched around a coffee cup he hadn't drunk from. I'm not Elizabeth. How many times do I have to say it? Until I believe it. Until you're safely delivered and holding our child. Our child. The words still felt miraculous. After Philadelphia's diagnosis, after being told she was broken and barren, after 3 years believing motherhood was impossible, she was days away from proving them all wrong, or days away from dying in the attempt. She pushed that thought down. Dwelling on death wouldn't help anyone. A sharp pain seized her belly, not a kick. Different. Judith gasped and gripped the table edge. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly. Is it time? I don't know. Maybe. The pain is different than the false labor we had. Another contraction followed stronger. Judith's water broke, soaking through her dress and pooling on the floor. She stared at the wetness, understanding flooding through her. It's time. The baby's coming today. Nathaniel's face went white, but his hands were steady as he helped her to the bed. I'll get Mrs. Carson. The midwife appeared moments later, already dressed and alert despite the early hour. She'd been sleeping in her clothes, ready for exactly this moment. Let's see how far along you are. Her examination was quick and professional. You're starting to dilate. This is real labor. Could be hours, could be all day. First babies take their time. She looked at Nathaniel. You need to ride to the territorial court, notify Judge Thornton. We need official witness for the birth. Legal proof that the child was born before the deadline. I'm not leaving her. You have to. The law requires documentation. Ride hard, you can be back by evening. I'll take care of your wife. Nathaniel looked torn between duty and fear. Judith made the decision for him. Go, bring the judge. I'll believe fine. Mrs. Carson has delivered hundreds of babies. Not hundreds like you. Then I'll be her greatest success story. Judith tried to smile through the pain of another contraction. Go, fast as you can. I need you back before this baby decides to arrive. He kissed her forehead, grabbed his rifle and coat, and was gone. The sound of his horse fading into mourning echoed the fear in Judith's chest. But Mrs. Carson was all business. No room for fear or sentiment. Let's get you comfortable. This is going to be a long day. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Contractions came and went, growing stronger, but not yet unbearable. Mrs. Carson monitored progress, felt the baby's position, offered water and encouragement. Judith paced when she could, rested when she couldn't, and tried not to think about all the ways this could end badly. By afternoon, the contractions were 5 minutes apart. Hard enough that Judith had to breathe through them, grip the bedpost, focus on not screaming. Mrs. Carson pronounced her 8 centimeters dilated. Almost time to push. You're doing well, the midwife said. Better than most. Your body knows what to do. Then why does it hurt so much? Because birth is meant to hurt. It's the body's way of focusing every resource on one task. Pain keeps you present, keeps you fighting. Another contraction, harder. Judith felt something shift low in her belly, felt pressure that hadn't been there before. The baby's moving down, won't be long now. That was when they heard the horse. Single rider coming fast. Relief flooded through Judith. Nathaniel was back. The judge was here. Everything would be documented and legal. But the footsteps on the porch were wrong. Too light, too unsteady. And when the door crashed open, the face that appeared wasn't Nathaniel's or Judge Thornton's. Cormac Blackwood stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and holding a gun. "Where's my uncle?" His words slurred slightly, drunk or close to it. Mrs. Carson stepped between Cormac and Judith. "You need to leave. This woman is in labor." "I know she's in labor. That's why I'm here. That baby is the only thing standing between me and what's mine." "Mr. Blackwood, I'm ordering you to leave. A birthing room is no place for violence." "Violence? Cormac laughed high and unstable. "I'm not here for violence. I'm here to wait, to see if she survives, because if she doesn't, if that baby doesn't, my uncle loses everything. And I get the land that should have been mine from the start." Judith, in the grip of another contraction, couldn't speak, but her mind raced. He wasn't going to kill her directly. He was going to wait for nature to do his work. Wait for the difficult birth Mrs. Carson had warned about. Wait for Judith to die the way Elizabeth died. And if the baby survived without its mother, Cormac would find a way to ensure it didn't survive long. Mrs. Carson's hand moved toward the medical bag where she kept instruments, where she also kept a small pistol for emergencies. But Cormac saw the movement. "Don't." His gun steadied on the midwife. "Step away from the bag. Sit in that chair and keep your hands where I can see them. I can't deliver this baby from a chair. She needs help." "Then she better hope she can deliver it herself, because you're not touching her while I'm standing here." Another contraction seized Judith, massive and overwhelming. This one didn't fade. It built and built until she thought her body might tear apart. A scream ripped from her throat. Mrs. Carson half rose from the chair. "She's in transition. The baby's coming now. Let me help her or they'll both die." Maybe that's how it should be. Maybe this was never meant to work out. Footsteps thundered outside. The door exploded inward. Nathaniel and Remy Thornwood burst through, rifles raised. Behind them, Judge Thornton hesitated on the porch. Nathaniel took in the scene in one glance. Cormac with a gun. Mrs. Carson held at bay. Judith on the bed, clearly in active labor. His face went from shock to rage in an instant. "Put the gun down, Cormac." "Why, so you can take everything that should be mine, so you can get away with letting my mother die while you built your precious legacy. This isn't about Rebecca anymore. This is about you choosing bitterness over healing. Easy for you to say when you're not the one who found his mother's body, when you're not the one who grew up in poverty while you lived like a king in these mountains." Remy moved slowly to the side, trying to get an angle on Cormac without risking a shot that might hit Judith or Mrs. Carson. But Cormac tracked his movements, swinging the gun between threats. "Everyone stay where they are or I start shooting." Another massive contraction gripped Judith. This time she couldn't hold back the scream. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, like her body was being split in two. Mrs. Carson, desperation in her voice. "The baby's crowning. She's going to deliver right now, whether we're ready or not. Let me help her." No. Then you'll watch her tear apart from the inside. Is that what you want? To watch another woman die in this cabin? To have that on your conscience along with everything else? Something flickered in Cormac's eyes. Doubt. Grief. The ghost of the boy who'd found his mother dead. Nathaniel saw the opening and moved. He lunged for Cormac, not for the gun, but for the man himself. They went down hard wrestling for control. The gun skittered across the floor. Remy dove for it, came up aiming at Cormac. Don't move, or I'll put a hole through you, Mrs. Carson was already at Judith's side checking the baby's position. It's coming now. You need to push. I can't do this. You can and you will. This baby wants out. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. Judge Thornton finally entered the cabin, surveying the chaos with the weary resignation of a man who'd seen every kind of human foolishness. Someone want to explain what's happening here? But there was no time for explanations. Judith felt the pressure building to impossible levels, felt her body taking over, pushing whether she willed it or not. Mrs. Carson's voice guided her steady and sure. That's it. Push. Use that strength. Show this baby what Montana timber means. The pain was beyond pain. It transcended into something else, something primal and vast. Judith pushed with everything she had, pushed and screamed and felt herself tearing, but couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, because the baby was coming and nothing else mattered. Heads out, one more push, just one more. Judith bore down with the last of her strength, felt something massive move through her, felt herself split, and heard Mrs. Carson's sharp intake of breath. Then another sound, the most beautiful sound in the world. A baby's cry, loud and indignant and absolutely perfect. It's a girl. Mrs. Carson lifted the baby still attached by the cord covered in blood and vernix and screaming her fury at being born. 10 pounds if she's an ounce, healthy lungs, strong, your daughter to Mrs. Blackwood. The room seemed to freeze. Cormac, held down by Nathaniel and Remy, stared at the newborn with an expression of pure devastation. All his plans, all his bitterness, rendered meaningless by 10 pounds of squalling infant. Mrs. Carson cut the cord, cleaned the baby quickly, and placed her on Judith's chest. The weight of her daughter, the reality of her daughter, crashed over Judith like a wave. She'd done it. Against every prediction, every diagnosis, every person who'd said she was broken, she'd done it. Hello, Eleanor. Her voice came out rough from screaming. I'm your mother, and we both survived. Nathaniel, still pinning Cormac, looked at his daughter with wonder and terror mixing in his expression. A living child, an heir, everything he'd hoped for lying on his wife's chest and crying with indignation at the world. Judge Thornton stepped forward, his official capacity overriding the violence and chaos. Mrs. Carson, time of birth, 4:17 in the afternoon, May 4th, 1874. Sex of child, female, approximately 10 pounds, healthy by all appearances. Name, Judith looked at Nathaniel. They discussed this during the long winter. Eleanor Rebecca Blackwood, Eleanor for Nathaniel's mother, Rebecca for the sister he lost. Cormac made a sound like a wounded animal. Naming the baby for his mother, the woman Nathaniel had failed to save, was salt in a wound that had festered for 22 years. I need to examine you, Mrs. Carson said quietly to Judith. Make sure the bleeding is normal. Make sure everything came out that should have. The examination was uncomfortable and undignified. Judith held Eleanor close while Mrs. Carson worked. After several minutes, the midwife sat back. You tore, bad tearing. I'll need to stitch you, but the bleeding is slowing. The womb is contracting properly. You are going to survive, Mrs. Blackwood. The words didn't fully register at first. Then they did. She was going to survive. She and Eleanor both. Philadelphia had been wrong, not just about conception, about everything. Judge Thornton pulled out a leather document case and began writing. Eleanor Rebecca Blackwood, born May 4th, 1874, to Nathaniel and Judith Blackwood. Witnessed by myself, Judge Harrison Thornton of the Montana Territorial Court, and Abigail Carson, licensed midwife. He looked up. The birth is documented. The land claim requirement is satisfied. Mr. Blackwood, your property is secure. Cormac, still restrained on the floor, began to weep. Not angry tears, broken ones. It's over. 22 years of waiting and it's over. I get nothing. Nathaniel slowly released him and stood. He looked at his nephew, at the man who'd poisoned his horses and tried to drive off his cattle, and stood by hoping Judith would die. Looked at him and saw not an enemy, but a wounded boy who'd never healed. Remy let him up. Remy's eyes narrowed. He tried to kill your wife and child. He tried to reclaim what he thought was his. Let him up. Cormac rose slowly, defeat written in every line of his body. He expected violence, expected to be thrown off the property or worse. What he didn't expect was what Nathaniel said next. You're right. I failed your mother. I sent money when I should have gone myself. I chose building this land over protecting family, and it cost Rebecca her life. Finally, you admit it. I've always admitted it, to myself, to Judith, to God. I just never said it to you. Nathaniel's voice was steady. So here it is. I'm sorry, Cormac. I'm sorry I wasn't there when your mother needed me. I'm sorry you grew up in poverty while I prospered. I'm sorry you found her body. I'm sorry for all of it. Sorry doesn't give me back those years. No, it doesn't. Nothing can. Nathaniel gestured at baby Eleanor, still crying on Judith's chest. But I can give you a choice. Walk away now. Hate me forever. Spend the rest of your life bitter about what you didn't get. Or stay. Work this land with me. Become part of the family you say you wanted. Cormac stared at him. You can't be serious. Judge Thornton, what's the sentence for attempted harm to a pregnant woman? Prison time. 3 to 5 years most likely. And if I don't press charges, then he walks free. The judge's tone made clear what he thought of that option. Nathaniel looked at Cormac. Here's my offer. You poisoned my horses. You tried to cause a stampede. You just broke into my home with a gun while my wife was giving birth. By all rights, you should hang. So hang me. No, you're going to prison for 3 years. Not because I'm pressing charges, but because you need time to decide what kind of man you want to be. Bitter like your father or better like your mother. And when you get out, if you choose to come back here, you can work this land alongside me. Not as my heir, as my partner. Earn your place instead of demanding it. Why would you offer that? Because you're Rebecca's son. Because family matters even when it's broken. Because everyone deserves a chance to choose healing over bitterness. Nathaniel's voice roughened. And because I loved your mother, I failed her. But I won't fail you the same way. Not if you'll let me try. Cormac's face worked through a dozen emotions. Rage, grief, disbelief, something that might have been hope. Finally, he looked at Eleanor, at the baby named for his dead mother, and the fight went out of him. I poisoned the horses, started the stampede, planned to hurt the baby if it survived birth. The confession poured out. I've been planning it for years, waiting for you to marry, to try for an heir so I could destroy it and watch you lose everything. I know. I wanted you to hurt like I hurt. I know that too. And you're still offering me a way back. Not a way back, a way forward. The past is done, Cormac. We can't change it, but we can choose what happens next. Judge Thornton cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwood, are you certain about this? The man just confessed to multiple crime. I'm certain. Cormac will serve his time. 3 years to think about what he wants, and then he'll have a choice. Make peace or stay bitter, but at least he'll have the choice. The judge looked at Cormac. Do you accept these terms? Cormac stared at Eleanor, at the baby that represented everything he'd lost. Finally, he nodded. I accept. Then I'm placing you under arrest for destruction of property and attempted intimidation with a weapon. You'll be remanded to the territorial prison in Deer Lodge. 3 years, no early release. Judge Thornton produced manacles from his saddlebag. Hold out your hands. As Cormac was led away, he looked back at Nathaniel one last time. Why, after everything I did, why give me another chance? Because someone should have given your mother another chance. Someone should have saved her when she needed saving. I can't undo that failure, but I can do better by you, if you'll let me. After they left, silence settled over the cabin. Mrs. Carson finished stitching. Judith gave her instructions for recovery and finally allowed Nathaniel to approach the bed. He looked at his wife and daughters with an expression of such raw emotion that Judith's eyes filled with tears. Joy and grief and overwhelming relief all tangled together. You did it, his voice broke. You survived. She survived. You proved everyone wrong. We did it, together. Judith adjusted Eleanor in her arms. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused newborn eyes. Come meet your daughter. Nathaniel sat carefully on the bed and touched Eleanor's tiny hand. She gripped his finger with surprising strength. She's so small. 10 pounds is not small. Compared to you, everything's small. He leaned down and kissed Judith's forehead, then Eleanor's. Thank you for risking everything, for being stronger than Philadelphia said you could be, for giving me what I thought I'd never have again. What's that family, real family? Not built on obligation or duty, but on choice. You chose this, chose me, chose Montana, and now we have her. They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, casting the cabin in gold and red light. Outside, Montana stretched wild and endless. Inside, three people who'd been broken in different ways had found a way to become whole. 2 weeks after Eleanor's birth, visitors began arriving. Father Declan Donnelly rode up first, come to baptize the baby and check on Judith's recovery. I heard what happened, he said, cradling Eleanor with the gentle competence of a man who'd blessed hundreds of children. Cormac breaking in during the birth, the judge having to arrest him. All of Montana Territory is talking about it. Let them talk. Judith was recovering slowly. The tearing had been severe and moving was difficult, but she was alive. She was healing. And every time she looked at Eleanor, the pain seemed insignificant. Declan performed the baptism with water from the mountain creek, speaking the ancient words over Eleanor's head. I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. He made the sign of the cross on her forehead. Welcome to the family of God, Eleanor Rebecca. After the ceremony, he sat with Judith on the porch while Nathaniel tended animals. Do you regret it? Declan asked. Leaving your vows, choosing this hard life. Judith looked at the mountains at the cabin she now called home, at Nathaniel working in the distance. I thought leaving the convent meant leaving home, but Father, I feel closer to him here than I ever did behind those walls. Perhaps God called you to a different kind of service. Not contemplation, but action. Not prayer alone, but prayer made flesh through work and sacrifice. I was told I was broken, that my body couldn't do what women's bodies should do. And what do you believe now? Judith adjusted Eleanor in her arms. The baby was sleeping peaceful and perfect. I believe broken is just another word for different, and different is what survives out here. Declan smiled. You've become quite the philosopher, Mrs. Blackwood. I've become quite the mother. That's philosophy enough. The next visitor was Abigail Brennan from the trading post, bringing gifts from the frontier community. Cloth for diapers, a hand-carved cradle, jars of preserved food to help Judith through her recovery. Words all over the territory, Abigail said. The nun who proved the doctors wrong. The woman too big for Philadelphia who gave birth to the biggest baby I've ever helped deliver. You're famous, Mrs. Blackwood. I just wanted to survive. You did more than survive. You showed every woman who's been told she's too much or not enough that maybe the problem isn't us. Maybe it's the measuring stick. Other women came too. Mary Henderson, the young pregnant woman Judith had met at the trading post, brought questions about labor and delivery. Other mothers brought their own stories of difficult births survived. And slowly Judith realized she'd become something unexpected. Not just a mother, but a source of hope for women who'd been told they were wrong. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the birth, Judith sat at the table and pulled out pen and paper. She had letters to write, debts to settle with the past. The first was to Mother Superior in Philadelphia. Reverend Mother, I write to inform you of the birth of my daughter, Eleanor, Rebecca Blackwood, born May 4th, 1874. The calling you sent me toward was not what either of us expected, but it was what God intended. I do not ask forgiveness for leaving my vows. I ask that you remember me as proof that God's plans are bigger than our understanding, and that broken is sometimes just another word for blessed. Respectfully, Judith Whitmore Blackwood. The second letter was harder. She addressed it to the medical practice in Philadelphia, where she'd been examined and declared defective gentleman. I was examined by your colleague in 1869 and declared incapable of childbirth due to malformed anatomy. I write to inform you that your diagnosis was incorrect. My daughter, 10 pounds at birth, arrived healthy after a difficult but successful delivery. My supposedly defective body functioned precisely as intended. Perhaps your understanding of normal was too narrow. I suggest broader thinking in future examinations and humility about the limits of medical knowledge. Mrs. Judith Blackwood, Montana Territory. She sealed both letters and gave them to Nathaniel to mail next time he went to town. Then she opened her journal, Agnes's gift, now filled with her own truth. I came to Montana believing I was broken. I learned instead that broken is a word people use when you don't fit their expectations. My body wasn't broken. It was built for this life, for this place, for this purpose. I've carried a child the doctor said was impossible. I've survived a birth they said would kill me. And I've found in these mountains what Philadelphia could never give me, proof that I was exactly right all along. Not despite my differences, but because of them. Remy Thornwood visited in June, bringing fresh meat and news from the wider territory. He held Eleanor with surprising gentleness for such a rough man. She's strong, like her mother. He handed the baby back to Judith. Heard about Cormac. Heard Nathaniel gave him a choice instead of a noose. He did. That's either wisdom or foolishness. Time will tell which. You think Cormac will come back worse? Don't know. Prison either breaks a man or makes him. But I'll say this. Remy's pale eyes were serious. Nathaniel gave him something no one else ever did. A reason to be better instead of bitter. Whether Cormac takes that gift, that's on him now. After Remy left, Judith pondered his words. Cormac in prison, working through 22 years of rage and grief. Would he emerge healed or hardened? Would Nathaniel's offer of redemption matter? Or would old wounds prove too deep to ever close? Only time would answer. And time, Judith had learned, was Montana's most valuable commodity. The summer passed in a blur of new motherhood. Eleanor grew rapidly, gaining weight and strength with each week. She was an easy baby considering her size. Slept well, nursed eagerly, cried only when she needed something. Judith fell into the rhythm of caring for an infant while slowly recovering her own strength. By September, she could walk without pain. By October, she was back to light work around the cabin. By the time the first snow fell, she felt almost like herself again. Almost. Because motherhood had changed her in ways that went beyond the physical. She was no longer just Judith, the woman too big for Philadelphia. She was Eleanor's mother, Nathaniel's wife, a woman who'd gambled everything and won. 3 years later, spring 1877. The cabin looked different now. Nathaniel had added a room for Eleanor, built a larger barn, expanded the corrals. 3 years of prosperity showed in every improvement. The land that had almost been lost was now thriving. Eleanor was 3 years old, already tall for her age and showing signs of inheriting her mother's build. She followed Nathaniel everywhere, chattering constantly, fearless in the way of children who'd never been told to be small. Judith stood in the garden, one hand pressed to her belly, where twins grew. Judson and Matthias, if the size of her was any indication. She'd conceived easily this time, carried easily. Her body knew what to do now. Philadelphia's curse had become Montana's blessing. A horse approached from the south, single rider moving slowly. Judith shaded her eyes against the sun and felt her stomach tighten. She knew that silhouette, knew that posture. Cormac Blackwood had come home. He looked different. 3 years of prison had carved away the softness of his youth, leaving behind something harder and leaner. His clothes were simple, his possessions limited to what fit in saddlebags. But his eyes, those had changed most. The desperate bitterness was gone. In its place was something quieter. Not peace, not yet, but possibility. Nathaniel emerged from the barn, Eleanor at his heels. He saw Cormac and went still. 3 years of wondering if this moment would come, if his nephew would return, seeking forgiveness or revenge. Cormac dismounted slowly. He looked at Nathaniel, at Judith, at Eleanor playing in the dirt with sticks and stones. I came back. So, I see. Spent 3 years thinking about what you said, about choosing what kind of man to be. Bitter like my father, or better like my mother. Cormac's voice was rough, unused to extended speech. I don't know if I can be better. Don't know if I can let go of everything that happened, but I want to try. That's all anyone can ask. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not asking to be family, just asking for the work you offered, a chance to earn my place instead of demanding it. Nathaniel studied his nephew for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Welcome home, Cormac. The handshake was awkward, both men and uncertain. But it was a start, and starts mattered in Montana. Eleanor toddled over, curious about the stranger. She looked up at Cormac with the fearless assessment of a 3-year-old. Who you on? I'm your cousin, Cormac. You're tall. So are you. Mama says tall is good, says Montana likes tall. Cormac looked at Judith, at the woman who'd been at the center of his bitterness, the woman whose pregnancy had ended his dreams of inheritance. Your mama's right. Montana likes tall. The first months were tense. Cormac worked hard, proving himself through action rather than words. He repaired fences, helped with the cattle, learned the trap lines. He kept to himself, ate meals alone, maintained distance from the family he'd once tried to destroy. But slowly, carefully, something changed. Eleanor's fearless affection wore down his defenses. She followed him around, asking endless questions, completely unaware of their complicated history. To her, Cormac was just another adult in her world. Someone who could lift her high, who knew how to whittle toys from wood, who didn't mind her constant presence. One afternoon in late summer, Judith found Cormac teaching Eleanor to identify animal tracks by the creek. He was patient with her, praising her efforts, gently correcting mistakes. He looked up as Judith approached, guilt flickering in his eyes. She asked me to teach her. I can stop if you'd rather. No, she needs to learn, and you're teaching her well. Judith lowered herself carefully to a flat rock, her pregnant belly making movement awkward. Cormac, can I ask you something? I suppose. In the cabin during Eleanor's birth, when you had the gun, were you really going to hurt us? He was quiet for a long moment, watching Eleanor chase frogs through the shallows. I thought I was. Spent years imagining it. How I'd make Uncle Nathaniel pay for everything. How I'd take what should have been mine. He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. But when I actually stood there watching you suffer through that birth, seeing the baby come into the world, I realized something. Hurting you wouldn't bring my mother back, wouldn't undo the past, would just make me exactly like my father. A man who destroyed everything he touched. So what stopped you? The name. When you said Eleanor Rebecca Blackwood, when you named her for my mother, something broke in me. Or maybe it broke open. I realized you weren't my enemy. You were just a woman trying to survive, same as my mother tried to survive. And I was about to become the thing I hated most. He looked at Judith. I'm sorry for all of it. For the horses, the stampede breaking in during the birth. I'm sorry. I know. How can you forgive that? Because I understand pain. Understand how it can twist you into someone you don't recognize. She watched Eleanor splash in the creek. And because holding on to anger is exhausting. I spent years angry at Philadelphia for rejecting me, at Robert Ashford for humiliating me, at my own body for being wrong. That anger didn't change anything, just made me miserable. So I let it go, chose to build something instead of destroying from bitterness. You make it sound easy. It's not. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than labor, harder than proving doctors wrong, harder than surviving Montana winters. But it was necessary, because I couldn't be Eleanor's mother and Philadelphia's victim. Had to choose one. I chose her. Cormac nodded slowly. Uncle Nathaniel said the same thing, said I had to choose between being my mother's son or my father's legacy, that holding on to bitterness would poison everything I touched. He's right. I know, but knowing and doing are different countries. Judith smiled. Then keep traveling. You'll get there eventually. That fall, a grizzly bear wandered too close to the cabin. Eleanor had escaped her mother's watch and was playing near the tree line. The bear, a massive male, looking for food before winter caught her scent. Cormac saw it first. Saw the bear moving toward Eleanor, saw the child oblivious to danger. He didn't think, didn't calculate, just ran, putting himself between the child and the bear, firing his rifle into the air to scare it off. The bear charged instead of fleeing. 300 pounds of muscle and fury. Cormac got 2 shots off before it was on him. Claws raked his arm and shoulder, tearing flesh. Jaws snapped inches from his face. He fought with everything he had, knowing he was losing. Nathaniel's rifle shot from the cabin porch took the bear through the heart. It collapsed on top of Cormac, dead weight crushing him into the ground. They pulled him out, bleeding and torn, Mrs. Carson, visiting to check on Judith's pregnancy, stitched the wounds while Cormac gritted his teeth and refused to scream. 13 stitches in his arm, 20 in his shoulder, deep gouges that would scar permanently. Eleanor, safe and terrified, clung to Cormac's good arm while Mrs. Carson worked. "Don't die, please don't die." "Not dying, little one. Takes more than a bear to kill a Blackwood." That night, after Eleanor was asleep and the pain had subsided to a dull roar, Nathaniel sat beside Cormac's makeshift bed in the barn. "You could have run, could have saved yourself, and let the bear take Eleanor." "No, I couldn't." Cormac's voice was thick with exhaustion and lingering shock. "She's family. That's what you said. Family protects family. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you. You understand now. I understand that being angry at you for not saving my mother while I stood by and almost let Eleanor die would make me the worst kind of hypocrite." He turned his head to look at Nathaniel. "I understand that what happened to my mother wasn't your fault. You sent help. She didn't take it. And I can hate my father for killing her, but I can't hate you for failing to stop what you didn't even know was happening." "Thank you." Nathaniel's voice was rough. "For saving Eleanor, for choosing her life over your safety, for being the man your mother would be proud of." "I'm trying. God knows I'm trying." 3 months later, when the twins Judson and Matthias were born healthy and huge, and screaming with fury at the world, Cormac was there. He held them awkwardly, his scarred arm still healing, and looked at Nathaniel with something like peace. "Your family keeps growing. Our family. You're part of it now, Cormac. If you want to be." "I do. I don't deserve it, but I want it." "Deserving has nothing to do with it. Family isn't about deserving, it's about choosing, and we choose you." 5 years after Cormac's return, summer 1882, the Blackwood land had transformed. The original cabin was now a large house with multiple rooms. The barn had been rebuilt and expanded. Corrals held 24 horses and 50 head of cattle. Fields produced hay and grain. What had been one man's survival claim was now a working ranch that employed 3 hired hands. Judith stood on the porch watching her children play in the yard. Eleanor, now 8 years old and already 5'6", was teaching her 5-year-old twin brothers how to rope a fence post. Judith's 4th pregnancy showed in the swell of her belly, due in 3 months. Cormac worked alongside Nathaniel, both men checking fence lines in the distance. Over 5 years, Cormac had gone from bitter nephew to trusted partner. He'd married Abigail Brennan's daughter, Sarah, a widow with a young son. They lived in a cabin on the eastern edge of the property, part of the Blackwood land, but separate enough for independence. Every Sunday, the whole family gathered for dinner. Nathaniel and Judith, their 4 children, Cormac and Sarah, and her son, sometimes Remy, dropping by with fresh game. Sometimes Declan Donnelly stopping in on his circuit. A community built from broken pieces that had somehow become whole. That evening, after the children were asleep, Judith sat at the table with the journal Agnes had given her 9 years ago. It was full now, every page covered with her truth. She turned to the last blank page and wrote, "They said I was broken. Too big for society, too wrong for normal life, incapable of being wife or mother. They measured me against standards I could never meet and declared me inadequate. I came to Montana Territory believing those declarations, believing I was Philadelphia's failure, that my body was defective, that my only value was in service to others, since I could never have the normal life I wanted. I was wrong. They were wrong, all of them. My body wasn't broken. It was built for this life, for survival in harsh land, for bearing strong children who won't break under Montana's demands, for proving that different isn't defective, it's just different. I've delivered 4 babies. I've survived births the doctors said would kill me. I've built a life in a place that doesn't care about Philadelphia's standards. I've become a midwife to frontier women, helping others prove they're not broken either. And I've learned the most important lesson of all: strength isn't about fitting in. It's about finding where you belong and refusing to apologize for taking up space. Montana is big enough for women like me. Thank God someone finally told me so." She closed the journal and looked up to find Nathaniel watching her from the doorway. "Writing your story? Finishing it? Or at least this chapter?" He crossed to her and placed his hands on her shoulders. 9 years of marriage had taught him how to touch her, not gently as if she were fragile, firmly acknowledging her strength. "What does it say?" That broken is just a word people use when you don't fit their mold, and that finding where you belong is worth every risk. Do you belong here? Judith looked around the house they'd built together, at the children sleeping in the next room, at the land visible through the windows, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, at the life she'd created from the scraps Philadelphia had thrown away. I belong here more than I've belonged anywhere. Montana, 1920, 46 years after Eleanor's birth. Eleanor Blackwood Cartwright finished her story and opened her eyes. Wesley, her grandson, sat on the porch rail with tears streaming down his face. That's what happened. Great-Grandma Judith really did all that. Every word true, and I was that baby Wesley, born into chaos, named for a legacy of strength, born to a mother the world called broken, who proved them all wrong. Where is she now? Eleanor's face softened with grief. She passed 2 years ago, 73 years old, died in this house in the bed she shared with your great-grandfather for 46 years, surrounded by children and great-grandchildren who exist because she refused to believe Philadelphia's lies. And great-grandfather Nathaniel died 6 months after her. Mrs. Carson said his heart just gave out, but I think he died of missing her. They were partners for so long, he didn't know how to exist without her. What about Cormac? Ran this ranch alongside Nathaniel for 30 years. Died 5 years ago, age 60, of pneumonia. But he died sober, at peace, surrounded by family he'd chosen instead of the bitterness he'd been born into. Eleanor stood and walked to Wesley. He taught my sons to trap and track. Taught me to stand up for myself when men tried to make me small. Became the uncle we all needed because Nathaniel gave him the chance to be better than his pain. Wesley wiped his eyes. And now I'm supposed to go back to school where everyone calls me names. Now you're supposed to go back to school knowing you come from Montana timber, from a woman who was told she was wrong and decided the world was wrong instead, from a legacy of strength that bends but never breaks. I'm tired of bending. Then don't bend. Stand tall, take up space, make them uncomfortable with how much room you require. Because Wesley being too much for small minds is not a flaw, it's a gift. Eleanor walked to the house and returned with a photograph. Judith at 60, tall and strong, surrounded by 20 grandchildren of varying sizes. Her face showed every year she'd lived, every hard winter, survived every baby delivered. But it also showed something else: satisfaction, pride, victory. This is what broken looks like after it stops believing the diagnosis. This is what happens when you find where you belong and build a life there. Your great-grandmother started with nothing but Philadelphia's rejection and a mountain man's desperate proposal. She ended with this: a family, a legacy, proof that different is exactly what survives. Wesley took the photograph, studying his great-grandmother's face. She looked strong. She was. Strongest woman I've ever known. And she'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you. The world will always have opinions about people who don't fit their molds. Let them. You're not here to fit. You're here to survive, to build, to prove that being too much is exactly enough. Montana timber. Montana timber? We bend in storms. We don't break. Wesley stood straighter, his 6'5" frame no longer hunched with shame. I can do that. You're a Blackwood. Of course you can. Eleanor smiled. Now go home. Tell your mother you're going back to school. And when those boys call you names, you remember. Your great-grandmother was called worse by better people, and she built an empire anyway. After Wesley left, Eleanor sat alone on the porch as sunset painted the mountains gold and red. She thought about her mother, about the legacy Judith had left behind. Not just land or wealth, though there was plenty of both, but something more valuable. The knowledge that breaking free of other people's expectations was the first step to discovering your own strength. 4 generations of Blackwoods had grown up hearing Judith's story: the nun who proved doctors wrong, the woman too big for Philadelphia who became exactly right for Montana, the broken thing that turned out to be whole all along. And every one of them, when faced with the world's cruel assessment of their differences, had the same weapon their great-grandmother had wielded: the absolute certainty that different wasn't wrong. It was just waiting for the right place to become right. Eleanor stood and walked to the graves on the hillside. Nathaniel and Judith buried side by side under Montana sky. Next to them, Cormac and his wife, Sarah. And beside them, Elizabeth and her unnamed baby, finally at peace after decades of rest. She placed fresh wildflowers on each grave and spoke to the dead as if they could hear. Wesley came today, struggling with the same thing you struggled with, Mama, being too much for the world to accommodate. I told him your story, told him about Philadelphia and the doctors and Robert Ashford, told him about Montana and Nathaniel and the baby no one thought you could have, told him everything. The wind moved through the pine trees carrying the scent of sage and summer grass. He's going back to school, going to stand tall instead of shrinking. Because you taught us that, Mama. You taught us that strength means taking up the space you need, not apologizing for existing. Eleanor touched the headstone, simple granite, carved with simple words. Judith Whitmore Blackwood, 1845 to 1918, Montana timber, beloved wife and mother. Thank you, Eleanor whispered, for being too stubborn to believe you were broken, for proving that different is what survives, for building a legacy strong enough to hold 4 generations of children who needed to know they weren't alone in being too much. She walked back to the house as stars began to appear. Inside, the photographs and journals and artifacts of Judith's life waited, the nun's habit carefully preserved. The medical journal Cormac had given her, its pages yellowed, but its words still legible. The letters to Philadelphia copies kept in Judith's careful hand. All of it proof that one woman's refusal to accept the world's verdict could change everything. Montana stretched dark and vast beyond the cabin windows. The same mountains that had tested Judith now sheltered her legacy. The same harsh land that had killed Elizabeth had let Judith thrive. Because strength came in forms Philadelphia couldn't measure. In women too big for society's boxes. In bodies that didn't break when everyone said they should. In Montana timber which bent in storms but never ever broke.